And welcome everybody to another edition of Fantasy Sports Edition of the HeatRatio podcast. Your host, Tony Cotillo, joined by fantasy expert, fantasy analyst.
I like that.
Mr. John Coker. And we decided that we don't know what we're going to call it yet. That we want to dedicate an entire episode every other week just to fantasy sports. Obviously, it will be more relegated to whatever sport. Obviously, baseball, football, that's basically what we're talking. We'll gear it more towards baseball in the beginning. Towards the middle, it'll probably be baseball and football, and fade out with football towards the end. Not sure what we're going to call it, but it was something that we've been wanting to do. John's got a ton of fantasy knowledge. I have some myself, but he does a lot of work.
I have
some myself. Coach Dave couldn't join us today, but he will be in the fold as well going forward. But it's just something that we'd like to open it up because it's something that we play. It's something that, I wouldn't say, I don't want to say gamble because even though it is, DFS leagues now, everybody kind of gambles and you do play for a pot, but it's something we spend a lot of time on. John spends an insane amount of time on it because he gives us this sheet and, I'll have to take a picture of this and put it online, but, it's his own cheat sheet, does his own projections, his own analytics. I don't know how the hell he fits every position on one page. That's probably why I need a magnifying glass to read it. But
that is the magnified version. The one I use for my drafts is much smaller than that.
It is nuts. I mean, it's got to be 300 names on this thing, and it's just nuts. I'll be holding this really close to my eyes as I'm trying to read it. But while we're on the topic of just fantasy in general, a lot of people out there are big fantasy football players, and whenever I ask them, I say, "Hey, you play fantasy baseball?" They're like, "Ah, nah, man, nah, too much work, dude, too much work." And I get where they're coming with that, where they're coming from with that, but nowadays, though, it's a little different, and we're going to break this down. This is like our opening episode, so we're going to break down the logistics and the analytics of actually the fantasy game in general, not necessarily the players. Because we will have a special episode 2 weeks from today on the 20th of March where we'll actually break down the positions, the tiers, get you ready for your drafts a week before the season. And we'll post some of that stuff online as well. But this will be more of a generalized conversation about what fantasy baseball is. And the first question we ask is fantasy baseball versus fantasy football. How does it differ? Besides, like, what if I'm asking somebody, well, what's the difference? What do you kind of say to them? It's hard. I mean, a lot of people do ask the question.
Yeah, the biggest thing, I mean, scoring differs, and we'll get in a little more into the fantasy baseball scoring, but it's a little bit more complex. You're looking at more, football. You have quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end. I mean, nobody really looks at defense or kickers that much.
True.
You have 4 positions you're looking at. And each of those positions, when you're looking at quarterbacks, you're looking at passing yards, passing touchdowns, interceptions, throwing some rushing yards. You know what I mean? You look at receivers, you're looking at receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns. That's it. 3 stats for one player. When you get into the fantasy baseball aspect, I mean, you have catchers, position players, infielders, your outfielders. Then you got pitchers, which are measured by a whole different, standard than the hitters are. So that's probably the biggest difference. Once you get into the scoring, I mean, you have some leagues that are points leagues, and you have some rotisserie leagues. The closest thing to football is definitely going to be your points league. So, like football, you get 4 points for a passing touchdown or 6, depending on your league rules. Football or baseball, you got to know your league rules, and it's so much more important than baseball. Sometimes there's categories that are scored or not scored. But in terms of a points league, typically it's a point for a single, 2 for a double, 3 for a triple, 4 for a homer.
Exactly.
Every RBI, every run, 2 points for a stolen base. So you're just accumulating points. A lot of times these points leagues are done head-to-head, just like football. That's the closest representation of a baseball league to football, as well as having weekly lineup changes as opposed to daily. That's really the other biggest, I don't want to say misconception. Way back in the day, baseball, you set your lineup every day. What pitchers are going, what guys are platooning, which guys are riding the pine today. I don't get into any daily leagues.
I hate the daily leagues.
I will only get into leagues where you set your lineup once a week.
Set it and forget it.
Yeah, so you do have to know some of your information, but come Monday at noon is a good barometer of your deadline. But usually by then you set it and then you forget it. If a guy hits the DL on Tuesday, you get no stats for that guy. But you got 22 players times, let's just say 5 games a week. You know what I mean? You got that's a lot of stats you're putting up, so it doesn't necessarily kill you. It could kill you in a head-to-head. The thing with the head-to-head leagues is also that your starting pitching either makes or breaks you. If you have a pitcher that's going to pitch in 2 games, 2 starts in 1 week, if he gets 2 wins and the quality start and goes 7 innings and only gives up 2 earned runs, he is going to outscore every player on your team by far. So there's a lot of variance in terms of your starting pitching, and that really drives the head-to-head aspect of this. I mean, you still need your hitters, but if your pitchers do nothing, you're probably going to lose, and if your pitchers do a lot, you're probably going to win. So the strategy when drafting in a points league, a lot of times you got to get those stud pitchers early.
I know you're right, and you bring up a good question too, and which was I was going to ask you because we're going to get into the rotisserie leagues, the total points leagues, the head-to-head leagues, because they are all done differently. But is one of the biggest things. I don't like the daily weeks, the daily lineup changes as well. I think it drives you crazy unless that's maybe your job is fantasy sports, which is that's fine. There's a lot of people that do that, but for the everyday guy who has a full-time job and does this on the side, really hard to complete your lineup changes every single day. But one of the biggest differences with football, you have a week to prepare for that matchup. And I don't mean the head-to-head matchup. What I mean is if I have Carson Wentz, and he's playing the Cowboys, I have a week to prepare for the Cowboys scheme, right? Do I want to start Carson Wentz, or maybe I have Baker Mayfield on the bench. He's going against Arizona. I have a week. With baseball, it's every single day. That matchup is every day you have to look at. And it changes every day. Now, I like to set it and forget it lineups. I really do. I like the 2-star pitchers are huge, just like you said. You look in there, okay, do I want, again, know the rules. What is your max starts per week? Some are 12, some are 14. So if I have 5 pitchers, they're all dual-star pitchers. That's 10 starts right there. So you have to watch that you're flirting with those max starts per week rule. What about relievers? Some leagues I've been in, are, hey, you need to start 4 starting pitchers and 2 closers every week. Some are just, hey, start 5 pitchers. You want to start 5 closers, you want to start whatever. And then you have those special SPRP guys, right? That, hey, it's the reliever who he's classified as a reliever, but he's really a starter. So I can put him into my closer spot, and he's going to get me wins too. So what would you say to the average guy out there just getting into baseball, saying, look, I've been a fantasy football player for years, and I'm going to start to cross over to baseball. What's the best league for me to join as a beginner? Is it a rotisserie league, or is it like a head-to-head league?
They would get the most enjoyment would be a head-to-head points league, because that's your closest parallel to what you're dealing with in fantasy football. Weekly lineup, every stat is a point plus or minus, added up at the end of the week, and you either get a win or a loss. I mean, I like that. That's definitely if you're transitioning into fantasy baseball, that's the way to go.
I definitely like that. Now, what do you say about the percentage points? I'm not a big, just like in football, I hate the negative points. I don't like the missed field goals. I don't like the fumbles. I don't like negative points. Now, I've been in leagues where they have negative points for strikeouts, which I'm not a big fan of. So, if you go for that power bat and the guy strikes out think about back in the day, guys like Adam Dunn who struck out 200 plus times, even Ryan Howard, right? You live or die with that strikeout.
Yep.
Save percentage, WAR, hold. That's another one. The hold percent, or how many holds. I mean, do you think sometimes people go a little too far with their statistics and what their point scale is? They take the fun out of it.
You can, but I think that is also one of the biggest differences with baseball versus football. There's so much more information, so many things that you could get really in depth in terms of baseball. And I think, truthfully, it's been around in baseball more than it's been around in football. And football's now catching up because now you're starting to hear more and more stats about how slot receivers deal against number one corners and what are their stats in those games. And you start hearing the advanced analytics even in football that I feel that baseball's had around all the time. Now, the whole concept of holds, this is, a lot of times guys are just adding more categories to try to hit every basis so that your Adam Dunn doesn't get killed because he also walks a lot, or this ratio's there, or that ratio's. Your typical rotisserie, back in the day it was a 4x4, but your typical rotisserie nowadays is 5x5. So you're looking at your batting average, runs, RBIs, stolen bases, home runs for hitting. You're looking at, your wins, your saves, your Ks, your ERA, and your WHIP, which is your...
How about your innings pitched?
That's typically not...
Really?
That's not a category where you're actually, where you're scoring. So those are really the only things that you look at. Now, when you're looking at batting average alone, that's really not as good of a barometer as necessarily your on-base percentage. Your on-base percentage tells you because it's including your walks and things. So it's giving you a better statistic of how good of a ball player you are. Some leagues replace batting average with on-base percentage, and that's a category instead or in addition. There's a league that I'm in. It's batting average and then slugging, which is, So every league's different, but it's trying to – the more categories you add, the more it's trying to make every player important. The holds are so that nobody would draft a middle reliever historically. But now with holds, that really brought it on. And now you have some middle relief guys. Think of, Andrew Miller a couple years ago. He was the setup guy, but – he was putting up a ridiculous strikeout rate, great whip, great ERA, and you're chipping in a couple wins. Well, for how good he brought those ratios down, he actually became valuable even though he didn't, and he was getting enough strikeouts as a reliever. So it's all about contributing, and the more categories you add, the more all the different players will contribute.
Now, you're talking about, as I actually think there's three systems of scoring, correct? So you're talking. So I was in an actual total points league, which was great. I liked it. There was no head-to-head.
So it was just total points.
It was just so every week you tallied up your singles, your doubles, all that, and the leaderboard just changed. Like one day, John Coker could be in first place. 3 weeks from now, Tony's in first place. Little Johnny's in first place.
Yeah.
Right? But seriously, it would go back and forth. You were against the other 9 or 11 people in your league, depending on, if it's 10 or 12 men. Now, the other thing that maybe you're talking about is the rotisserie where, wins. John has 5, Tony has 6, Tony gets a point.
Yeah.
Right? You're talking about that.
You're the line that you draw is, do stats equal a point or do stats get ranked in a category?
Yes.
And yes, typically your rotisserie that's where you get ranked within a category. So if you have 10 categories and 10 teams, the max amount of points you could get is 10, and the least amount you could get max you could get is 100. The least you could get is 10 if you get 1 in all 10 categories.
Right, and
yes.
I like the points. I do, and I like the head-to-head, but points. Mm-hmm. So there's also head-to-head leagues that do exactly what I was saying. Where, hey, runs head-to-head, who won the category? I want to win. I want total points. I want to see my number 4 guy racking up 330 points that week or, 400 points that week. Not, all right, he won a category. Like, I think that's weak.
Well, when I haven't seen a total points league like that in years. Like, typically the points are combined with a head-to-head weekly matchup. I know what you're saying. And the roto, in that perspective, you can also there's head-to-head roto leagues where it's the same thing. I'm playing against you, and we have 10 categories, and I'm putting my lineup for this week against your lineup. So if I beat you, I get 1, you get 0.
Right.
If you beat me, you get 1, I get 0. And it goes on like that. But then you have the season long, which is similar to your total points, but yes, you're getting ranked in categories.
Yes.
Yeah. So, good, bad, if somebody's running away with home runs and they're definitely, you're 5 months into the season and they're going to get 10 in that category, or if I know that I can't get any more move up in the home run category, I may say, well, I could pick up another point or two in stolen bases, so I'm going to get rid of a home run guy and a low average guy to get a stolen base guy. Whereas because for me, I need to make that move because I need to move up a point
strategy's
or two in a
all
category.
different.
Versus, I don't care if it's 1 home run, I don't care if it's 4 singles or 2 stolen bases. I'm getting 4 points. You know?
That's what I like, because I think like when the other end of the spectrum is you're not necessarily getting the best players. You're necessarily trying to just, who's going to help me this week to get me to win the double category, or so. I don't really like that. I like
you're doing
it's for everybody.
I'm not a big fan of a head-to-head rotisserie where you're doing categories, me versus you. I'm not a fan of that rotisserie. I'll only do the full year.
Now, what about draft style? There's a draft, and there's a regular snake draft or an auction style draft. I see the auction drafts are getting bigger and bigger in football. How about baseball?
Baseball, I think auctions were almost the original.
Oh, were they?
I feel like auctions in baseball were always there. It's always a little more difficult to, I would say, to manage, especially without the internet and things back in the day. You got to get everybody together, and you're doing different bids and
before phones.
Right. I mean, those drafts would have had to have taken probably 10 hours, 12 hours. And I remember I was probably in about 7th grade, so I remember doing one. And
Little Johnny,
yep, it took forever. But the good thing about auction drafts, if you could get in them, is that you could have any player you want. If you want Bryce Harper, Mike Trout, and Max Scherzer, you could have all 3 of them. The rest of your team is not going to be up to par. But you could build your
spend
team
all your money in one end.
Whoever you want. And it's all about finding the bargains. I mean, the last time I did an auction draft, you go about ranking your players the same way, but you have to associate the dollar values with those. So my 10th ranked player, based on how I expect him to perform, I expect him to perform at a $16 level. So I'm not going to go and pay more than that, but if I see that he's up there for 13, I'll outbid somebody and put up my 14. But you have to have a ballpark of what you think a guy's worth to know if you're getting value. And sometimes you have to overpay for somebody. If I know that I want Nolan Arenado on my team, I'm going to have to overpay for him, or whoever it may be. You may have to overpay, but if you want a guy, you got to pay that extra couple bucks.
I never, ever done an auction draft in any sport. So I think this year for football, I'm going to try first, because obviously the roster is less, and I can just imagine an auction draft with pitchers. But I think it would be neat just to learn the concept of it. But right now we're kind of in spring training, and you always see those guys, right? And I think we may have a difference of opinion on this, but how much stock do you put into spring training? And I don't put a lot into it, except what always strikes a little chord with me when we talk about spring training is I remember, and I can't remember the year. I'm going to guess maybe it was 2010, the Cole Hamels year, where he looked horrendous in spring training. His velocity was down like 5 miles an hour, and everybody's like, "Oh, he's just working on things." And he had a horrible year. So you can't always say spring training, just throw it to the side. But I would say 9 times out of 10, the guys are working on things. It's really hard. But do you put a lot of stock in the spring training at all?
Not really.
Just really. Maybe how about sleeper guys or rookies or?
Not really. I mean, I'll see how much of a run a young guy may be making at. Making the major league roster, making opening day. 90% of the time with those young ones, the rookies, the AAA players, and the guys that get invited to, to the major league camp. Look, it's all based on, I don't want to say politics. It's based on service time, just like the Bryce Harper signing and, the union getting involved, wanting him to get the long-term contract. There's things that go into play more than, hey, can this guy play at the major league level? Because there's service time, there's contracts, and all these things involved. So even though a guy's mashing at spring training, it doesn't mean that he's gonna make the team. He could get sent down because they're playing with the service time.
Right.
In spring training, I look at injured guys. If there's somebody that was injured, coming off an injury, I don't care what they bat. I want to see that they're swinging, they're getting through spring training without pain. Spring training, I'd say I take probably more negative out of spring training than positive. There's rare circumstances where I take the positive. I mean, you look at, number 4, number 5 starters, if they're young ones that are going to make the rotation, or somebody that has electric stuff. I mean, you have to pay attention to that. Come the regular season, who knows if it's going to last. And when you get those younger guys, they're usually on an innings limit. So you can only expect 150, 160 innings sometimes out of them. But in terms of the actual spring performance, no, I rarely look at that. You've seen this player, and look, the baseball season is so long, from spring all the way through October. I mean, granted the fantasy season, it's 80% in the middle, but it's so long, and there's hitters that start out hot in April and May. There's guys that go into slumps in June and July. There's guys that turn it on in August and September. So it's just, baseball is such an up and down sport, with win streaks and slumps and, all these players. I really don't put that much into spring training. I mean, you got to look, what are teams doing right now, especially early in spring training? They got their double-A guys pitching. They got guys that are coming from the International League. They got probably Jamie Moyer might be pitching for somebody at the moment. You know what I mean?
Moyer.
At age 48 or whatever.
48? He's probably 60.
Well, bottom line is you got a lot of those kind of guys that are showing up, so you can't really guys smashing home runs. Yeah, well, he's pitching against a bunch of guys that aren't major league talent.
No, that's true.
Same thing. You get a pitcher, and you're pitching against some of these younger guys or these role players, and, he's racking up strikeouts. Well, what's that mean? That doesn't mean anything. That guy's not going to – you ain't going to be pitching against this guy. You're going to be pitching against the Bryce Harpers of the world, No,
you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right. One thing, it's funny, and I'm just thinking about this as we talk, because obviously when you just talk about fantasy to me, one thing that is synonymous with my memories is just going to the store and buying that magazine. Buying that May, that even though it's printed in March, right? Buying that May mag, getting all the players right. We've talked about this before, but for some reason with baseball, I've relied more heavily online than I really did a magazine. And now, granted, I came into baseball late. I've probably been only playing fantasy baseball for maybe about 6 or 7 years, and you've been playing a lot longer than that. So when I came in, the internet was very relevant. So places like Roto World and things of that is where I would get most of my. But why is that? I feel like more people get the magazine in football, but they don't really get the magazine in baseball. And you can even look like the fantasy. There's like 8 different versions for football and like 2 for baseball. Is it just because people there's too much statistical data to put in a magazine for baseball? It's so many more pages because it's more players. I mean, I'm just trying to figure it out.
Market and demand is all it is.
That's good.
And you got to think, like you said, back in the day, and football's been popular for quite a while.
So long.
I know so many. I could tell you. There was probably every year for 10 years, one of the guys that in one of my football leagues, guarantee would stop at the store on the way to the draft to pick up a magazine to show up, and that's how he's ready for the league. You know what I mean? This dude, he hasn't looked at anything, but he stopped at the store on the way and picked up a magazine.
My one buddy was the USA Today. He stopped and bought that USA Today Fantasy Special Sports Edition for football, and that's all he drafted. He drafted. All right, number 9's available. All right, who's 10?
Yes.
Boom, that's what.
Yes. Yeah, and the guy's
he's
just crossing
won a
out
couple
number.
times. Man.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he's lost quite a few times too.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, no work into it whatsoever.
What I used to do, and I mean, this was pretty much pre-internet. I'll tell you what, Baseball Weekly back in the day.
Baseball
Weekly, which is now Sports Weekly combined.
Yep.
Baseball Weekly. I had a subscription to it at one point.
Really?
Oh yeah. Oh, that is where you would get, because there weren't 50 million internet articles and everything. And yes, you're playing kind of based on last week's information somewhat, because I think it would come out on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay.
So it's really wouldn't be helping you setting Monday lineups. You're always kind of a week late, which isn't good, but it was the best content that you could really find out there. I'm saying consistently, like moving through the season. Otherwise, but I don't think the market's really there for the baseball magazines like it is football, especially now.
Oh no!
Who's gonna go? Who's gonna go? You have everybody fantasy alarm and all these different fantasy providers.
Oh yeah,
the market's absolutely saturated.
Yeah, it is. I mean, everybody.
We're trying to compete.
Yeah, well, right. Well, I've always said this. Everybody has the same stats.
Yeah, except for me.
Well, no. What I mean is, I
I know what you mean. I'll
rephrase myself.
Right.
Not even that. The stats don't change, and what I mean by that is, whatever Ryan Howard did in 2007 is what he did. There's no what John thinks, what Tony. Now, the way we interpret that following year is what makes everybody unique, right? So everybody looks at certain things, and that's what makes it so great. Listen, I don't think there could ever be enough fantasy analysts in the world. I really don't, because I like the difference of opinion. I like to see what this guy looks at versus this guy. So there's a reason why. I mean, you always look at who are the guys in I'm a big CBS guy in fantasy. You got the Jamie Eisenberg, for football. So like, what did Eisenberg think? And I forget the other two guys. He's always
Dave Richards.
Dave Richards, another one.
Heath Cummings, I believe.
Is it Heath Cummings? Good pull by you. I think you're right. And and you look and see such a variation. Sometimes they're very similar, and sometimes they're just completely far apart. So and that's what's pretty cool. But fantasy baseball to me was always the bridge to football all the time. I needed that. I wanted something to fill my appetite. I really did. And obviously March is synonymous with March Madness in college basketball, but I was always like, I can't wait. End of the month, opening day's coming, the draft's coming. And for all the people that say it's too much work and because they don't know the players, what I will tell you is the same thing that I learned from football. Okay, when I started playing fantasy football, I learned players' names, patterns, statistics, backgrounds more than I ever knew before. Same things with baseball. You'll catch yourself on the Sunday night ESPN game watching the Rangers versus the Yankees because maybe you have Aaron Judge in your lineup, or maybe Yu Darvish is set to pitch. So you're looking at that, and it makes you learn more about the game and the players. So I really thoroughly enjoy fantasy baseball, and it makes me feel closer to the game, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I was always football first. I mean, that's a guarantee. But I've got so much more of an appreciation for fantasy baseball because of the intricacies and the strategy and just everything that goes into it. I enjoy fantasy baseball more than fantasy football.
Wow.
Because fantasy football, I don't want to say, but to me, it's basic. You got basically three positions: quarterback, running back, receiver, for the most part. All right, let's say four, whatever. 8 guys. I'm putting my 8 guys up against your 8 guys. One game, and the chips are going to fall as they may. There is so much luck involved. I'm putting my best running back against your best running back. Look, if you play the Chicago Bears defense and I'm playing against the Cardinals defense this week, guess who has the advantage? When it comes to baseball, it's really looking at the long haul and you have the ability to change your team drastically every single day, every single week. There's May call-ups. There's June call-ups. There's guys that get injured in the rotation. They call up a young guy. You have a long reliever come in and start pitching in the rotation. If he has 2 matchups against the Marlins and somebody else, you got a good chance of getting a win or 2. So there's just so many things that change on an ongoing basis every single day. You don't need to be up on it every day.
No.
You need to be up on it once a week.
Yes.
And look, everybody can pick and choose how much information they use is really what it is.
That's a good statement. I like that.
If you want to start looking, and I'll tell you, not religiously, usually I have my lineup in, but if I'm looking and I have 2 similar guys and one got 6 games and one's playing 4 games, I'm benching the 4-game guy because I got 6 games worth of stats from the other one.
Yeah.
All right. If I know that they're going against a poor pitching staff or playing hitters playing in Colorado, there's just things that I kind of pay attention to, but I'm never gonna. I only use those things to make a decision if there's 2 players that are close. All right, like there's no sense. I'm not going to sit Bryce Harper to put in some knucklehead because he's playing an extra 2 or 3 games.
Right.
But if there's guys that are close, and that should be the same thing that goes for football. You have 2 running backs that you're deciding through in the flex. If it's close, you go with the better matchup. You don't go and start your number 4 running back in place of your number 1 because he is a tough matchup. So, I mean, there's just so many different things that you could go and look into at baseball. It's just, to me, it's more exciting. It's more exciting. And every day you have information.
Yes. I have to agree with that. You're absolutely right. And I think, kind of based on what you just said is true. Obviously you have a longer leash on players in baseball because it's not a 13-game regular season, right?
Yep.
Or a 14-game regular season. So, like last year, a guy like Goldschmidt comes out and he's really tanking for the first half of the season. You're willing to wait because the odds are he's going to turn it back around, right? Yep. So Chris Bryant didn't have a tremendous year, like where as opposed to where he was drafted. So you're more inclined to let that guy sit and relax.
And that's a perfect example because those are 2 different situations. Goldschmidt, you're waiting to come out of the slump.
Yes.
Bryant, you're waiting to come out of the slump, but guess what? He had shoulder issues.
Exactly.
So he never came out of it. Now, perfect player for this year, all right? He's supposedly feeling 100% coming in. All I want to see him do is get through spring training without complaining about his shoulder. And yes, I think he will bounce back this year.
Chris Bryant.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too. He's a phenomenal player, and he's coming up on a contract too. So it's going to be interesting. And speaking about injuries, now the second half of the show we'll start talking a little player development here and player history. I got to ask you about a guy like Clayton Kershaw because Kershaw to me, you're going to laugh at this, but you know how I am by now. I took Kershaw at number 1 a few years back.
I knew you were going to say
okay?
that.
I did.
Knew you were going to say that.
Well, you know what? Because of what you said earlier in the show. You said,
points league?
Yes, in a points league, pitching means so much. And I remember, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to bang out like 2 or 3 starters before I even grab a bat. And I think that year, it was a phenomenal year, not an injured year for Kershaw. But I think that was before Wainwright had his decline, right? I think I had like him. I had Wainwright. I had Lester when Lester had a phenomenal year. Like I had all these guys together, and it was like I couldn't be stopped. So, but again, he comes in. Now we're talking about the injury again. Might not be able to make opening day. I mean, I feel like every year with Kershaw, it's something different. Will he ever be healthy enough to be that great pitcher that we? I mean,
simple answer: no.
It's a shame.
He's not going to. I don't see his health getting him to that point again.
And this is like the third straight year.
Dominant. Now that's not to say that he won't.
Still young,
pitch decent.
He's still young,
but I mean, you got to look at the workload that he had. He was so dominant for so many years. But I mean, I don't even know off the top of my head what he's been averaging innings wise over the past.
It can't be up to. It can't be up to standard.
No,
because of what he's done.
The last time he pitched over 200 innings was 2015.
Right.
So you're looking at he's averaging 161 innings a year. I mean, you can't. Granted, he's still under 3 with his ERA. He's still under 1.1 with his WHIP. Strikeout rate's good, but I believe his velocity's been a little bit down. He's not thrown like he used to. I mean, he's only 30 years, but he's been 11 years experience, man. I mean, when you're a pitcher and you're working as a horse all those years, 2010, 204 innings, 233 the next year, 236 the next year, down to 198 and then back up to 232. So you look at all those innings, and I mean, it wears on you. Plain and simple, it wears on you. And I have a concern. Last year, I was all in on Scherzer being the number one pitcher and possibly reaching a little higher than I typically would for a pitcher. I'm extremely nervous about Scherzer this year. And
because of workload?
34 years old. I mean, 220. He's gone over 200 innings every year since 2013. So, granted, that the picture child of stability and health, but at some point, and is it age 34 that doesn't happen? I mean,
it's an interesting question though, because especially when you talk about pitchers, because we've talked about this on the show where the game has changed, and I'm talking about the youth game. This starts at 8, 9, and 10 years old, where these kids. I mean, I remember growing up. I remember playing baseball, and for the rec league. That's all I did. I wasn't that good of a player, but I specifically remember having pitchers that pitched on our team that were very good, and they would get up there and we would start tinkering with things, throwing a curve, throwing a changeup, and the coach would go nuts. Yo, what are you doing? No. We're not throwing junk balls. That was because their arm wasn't fully developed yet. But now at 10 years old, they're learning how to hold a slider. They're learning how to throw a changeup because everybody wants their kid to get that scholarship, and he's going to, and it's kind of pressed these kids into more innings on their arm than they had when me and you were growing up. And this is a product of that, I think. I really do. These pitchers, 30 years old for a pitcher, think about it. At 30 years old, essentially, they have, for at least 15 years, at least, they've been pitching probably 200 innings. Okay? That's a long friggin' time.
And you have to look at even the number of innings. How many pitches per inning are you throwing? And even outside of that, then you add the bullpen sessions.
Oh,
you
yeah.
add spring training. You add off-season workouts. Your arm's still going through that motion. So
you're absolutely
when
good
they're
point.
throwing
You're
as hard as
right.
they do. Yeah, I don't know. But Scherzer, he's I don't know. I still have him as my number one pitcher. I am just nervous. I feel that you can recover. Your fantasy baseball team can recover easier if you lose out on your first-round hitter than if you lose out on a first-round pitcher.
I completely agree with that.
You lose out on that pitcher, not only are you not getting the hitting, you have a hole that's never going to be replaced.
It's
where
not.
You could find a bat or multiple bats when you have 14 starting slots. You could find guys, whether it's cheap home runs, cheap stolen bases.
I completely agree.
But, yeah, it's just when you do that pitcher first like that, if it doesn't pan out, you're really hurting. Really hurting.
I completely agree. And, I mean, I know we differ on this, but I'm a huge Chris Sale guy. So I see, 1, 2, respectively, you have Scherzer and Sale in your projections. I would go Sale just for the simple fact I like his game a little better and for the age factor. I definitely go with that, and I still think that Boston's going to win more games than Washington, even though Washington really has a good pitching staff. But what I want to ask is wins versus Ks. So I noticed that, that you have Chris Sale as your number 2 guy with 16 wins and Kluber with 18 wins. Obviously, Kluber with about 30 less strikeouts than Sale for the year. So how do you manage that? What are you looking more as strikeouts because it's a consistent point racker every week, or you're looking more at that big win, or depending on what the scoring system is?
Definitely depending on the scoring system. From a points perspective, look, either way, I want guys that are going to eat up innings, they're going to get a bunch of strikeouts, and the wins will come. Wins, I'm sorry, is one statistic that you cannot really pinpoint.
What's that like in my football statistic? Touchdowns.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Honestly.
It's very close, but it's still relevant.
Right.
It's still relevant. It's still a category. That wins category means just as much as the strikeouts. Yes, I can more easily predict how I'm going to get my strikeouts than I am my wins because there's just fluctuation year to year. I don't put too much in wins, but it has to come into the calculation. I have calculations behind all this that basically figures out how much each category is worth because I do this model here is based on a 5x5 rotisserie league.
Okay.
So these guys are getting ranked based on all 5 of those categories and weighing it out based on how much they produce in each of those 5 categories. So, but when I'm drafting, just because I have a guy that's higher, I have DeGrom at 4 with Kluber at 3. I'm probably going to take DeGrom before Kluber.
I would do that too.
This is the way the numbers played out with everything. But if Kluber gets 17 wins and DeGrom gets 15 instead of 18 and 14, DeGrom's the better pitcher. So I really want to look at strikeouts. I'm bigger on WHIP than I am earned run average. Okay. Ks and WHIP to me, look, they all count equally, but my walks plus hits divided by innings pitched are completely under my control. And earned run average, there's a lot of quirky things that can happen with earned run average. It's just the effectiveness of a pitcher to me is based on how many walks and hits they let up.
Now, if I said to you, so what do you have here? You have 40 pitchers ranked on this sheet. And I said
that's on your mini sheet.
That's on the mini sheet.
My draft sheet has 94.
Okay, so give me a just one. Give me a pitcher who essentially nobody's maybe looking at. Doesn't necessarily have to be a sleeper. Just a guy that is going to basically demand your attention during the draft, and that is going to eventually overtake, predictions or projections that not just you, but all the prognosticators out there, all the analysts out there that are actually projecting him to do. There's probably a couple guys, but just give me one that maybe we could look at. Is there anybody that comes to your mind right away? I'll give you. I mean, I look at a guy like Kyle Hendricks. That what's he going to do this year? Because I thought he obviously had a little bit of an injury. He had some issues last year. Pitches for a good team, and I think he's a guy you could probably get late. That could be one of your top 2 guys in your starting fantasy pitching lineup. Any guys that maybe you could throw out there, even if it's one?
Well, yeah, I don't know how late we're really looking.
It doesn't have to be late.
I like Jose Barrios this year.
Minnesota.
Right. Up and down career, has great stuff. You're just kind of waiting for him to put it all together in one season. Now, a lot of, if you're in a highly competitive league, he's not really going that late in the drafts. I may butcher the name, but Jesus Luzardo.
Good for you.
Well, he looks to be getting the starting nod. And he has great stuff. He's a young guy. He may not get more than 150 innings, but he's looking real good. And I'm talking late round flyers. Tyler Glasnow, he's
another
guy. Be a guy. I don't know how they're going to use openers in Tampa. I mean, I think they only had a 3-man rotation at one point, or a 6-man. I don't know. They the way they handled their pitching staff, but they were competitive.
Yeah,
it kind of worked for them. There's not enough, stats on good or bad, kind of like
more
the
analytics.
shift in. Right, exactly. More analytics. But those are a couple guys that I'm looking at. I would like to see what Yu Darvish does coming back. A lot of times you could get discounts on guys that are, coming off an injury-riddled season. I'm not going to draft him, but if the price is right and you're getting down late in the draft, hey, I'd rather take a flyer on a proven veteran that may not pan out than a young guy that's 3 years away from making the major league roster.
No, I like that. You're absolutely right, and with pitching being such a premium position, to be able to get somebody late or a reclamation project or a sleeper or a rookie or a guy, because I would go on to say I'm so sure on this, 99.9% of the time, your starting lineup, your starting pitchers for baseball never remain intact.
No.
Because you got the 15-day DL, now you got the 10 or the 7-day DL stand. You have guys just skip a rotation. It's never feasible when you're talking fantasy because you're constantly trying to plug somebody else in that lineup. But it's always good to go back and look at some of those later tiers and some of those guys are coming back from injury or just an off year to see if you can get a premium position at a pretty low price.
Yeah, and I mean, even what you said about your pitching staff never stays intact, and it doesn't. You look at the bottom of your staff. Okay,
Yep.
These guys are a dime a dozen, could be on the free agent heap or not. And that's when you have to start utilizing the two start pitchers.
Yep.
So you look at the free agents that are out there, and you see one's playing in Seattle against Felix Hernandez, who just gives up 50 earned runs nowadays.
King Felix. Whatever happened to King Felix?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I know. He fell off a cliff quickly.
Really hard.
There's been a ton of pitchers that
have
been, figured out how to pitch. Verlander, for example. I mean, he started going down. I mean, Pedro Martinez. These guys got to reinvent themselves as pitchers.
Pedro.
That's the one guy that didn't.
Who's your daddy?
Didn't. But if you got a two-start guy, you're playing in Seattle in that ballpark, and you got another one that's in Miami. You kidding me? You have
right.
two lesser offenses and great ballparks. I'm dropping that scrub at the bottom of my roster, and I'm throwing this guy in. You know what I mean?
I completely agree with you.
You gotta play. You can't be afraid to make moves in fantasy baseball.
And don't get carried away with the wins like we talked about earlier, because to me, it wins. When John said the bottom two guys, your rotation kind of like a dime a dozen. It's just like a mid-tier receiver in football. I mean, there's 40 guys that catch 50 to 60 balls. Well, there's 40 pitchers that win 11 to 13 games.
Yep.
So let's not get carried away here. There's no, you know what I mean? So you have to look at the two-start thing. You have to look at the matchups. You have to look at the conditions. Is it raining? Is it windy? What's the ballpark? I mean, it's very rare that you're going to start somebody that's pitching against the Phillies in Citizens Bank Park, or Colorado for that. You look at these parks.
Well, yeah, and I mean, two other things. I mean, you have the DHs you got to worry about.
That's another thing.
Because if there's
an extra hitter.
Well, it's an extra hitter for NL guys,
right?
Which you may not be rostering, but you lose the hitter for AL teams. So you got to watch when that DH only is playing a week in National League ballparks. They may only get 5 at bats that entire week.
That is true.
So you have to watch those things. You have to watch the platoons, the guys that if there's a guy that's facing 3 lefties, he may only play 2 games that week, and vice versa. So you got to watch the platoon guys too. Once again, that's the fringe of your roster, and depending on what it is, I'm in one league where first base depth, when you're looking at your corner infielders and this and that. There's so many guys out there that it doesn't matter which one you have. So, you know what? I'll drop the guy I got and pick up somebody that I know is going to get to 2 extra games. I mean, you have to maximize your lineup every week. And there are times you make the wrong decision. Nothing kills me more. I remember last year I benched my boy. Who's my boy?
Who's your boy?
Shohei Ohtani.
Oh, Ohtani.
I benched him. Because I was going to use him, I think, in the hitting slot. Anyway, I benched him, and because it was like the DH wasn't there or something, or maybe half of his games weren't using the DH. That dude smacked 2 home runs in a week, and I was so annoyed because he only had like 6 at bats, and then dude goes hitting 2 home runs. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
John was sent him a nasty gram.
Yeah,
you were right last year on Acuna. I mean, you were all about it. Alex Acuna, and he played very well.
And back to your wins comment.
Yeah.
The one league that I'm in, one other league, they've replaced it with quality starts.
I like that. I do like that. We've done that in our league too.
It's more predictable.
Well, we have both.
You have wins and see, and I'm not.
We have both.
If you're doing points, that's fine because it's like you hit this threshold and then
you get to that 5-6 inning mark. It would suck because you wouldn't get the win, and then you would get the loss. So this guy, you pitch 6 innings, right, and he throw 10 strikeouts. He's got a good game, 16 points. Well, now he just have -5 because he lost. So now he gets an 11. So guys are like, kind of equal out the, because it is a quality start. So we only give them like 3 points, but at least now it's a respectable 15 instead of an 11.
Well, I can't tell you how many times my guys pitched 5 2/3 innings, and I wanted to stab somebody.
5 2/3.
5 2/3. Dude, that's the worst. It's the worst thing you could hear in a quality start league. 5 2/3.
It's like the Clint Hurdle early pull. You know what I mean? That's what happens. Yep. But talk about. We got about 10 minutes left, and We're not going to get into tiers and rankings or any of that. We'll get into that on the next episode, get everybody ready. But I'm looking at free agency, and obviously the two biggest names, Manny Machado and Bryce Harper. Arenado signed the extension, but he's staying in Colorado. So talking about changing teams. So Manny Machado, does he go up or down based on where he finished last year playing in San Diego? And a guy like Bryce Harper playing in Washington his whole career now goes to Philadelphia. You got to at least tell me he's a +5 on home runs in that bandbox out there at Citizens Bank Park, especially on a left-handed hitter in the right field. So, how do you look at that with free agency? Is that kind of what you look at? And what player do you think will be more productive with their new team?
Well,
from a fantasy perspective.
In free agency, and look, when you have those two that you're talking about, super talents that are going to go to a team, they're going to make the team. So I'm not as concerned with the stats that they're going to get. Yes, Bryce Harper, you tick up his stats for going to, Citizens Bank Park. I'm not ready to tick down Machado's stats for going to Petco, which just, by the way, is not as much of a pitcher's park as it used to be.
You're right. You're right about that.
I'm not going to ding him. I may bump Harper up. I already had his stats projected as going to the Phillies, so I never really touched them. Where this comes into play is someone like I'm trying to think. Like let's just say a Segura, even though he wasn't a free agent. Depending on the lineup you go to and the team that you're going to, the ballpark and the spot in the lineup means so much. All right, Harper, Machado are hitting in the meat of the order. Machado might not have as much meat around him as Harper does.
True.
But basically my projections are still staying the same. I mean, I think once you get such a talented player and you can kind of expect the returns. I mean, you look at Machado, he was with the Orioles and didn't really have much around him. I mean, he did in maybe his first year or two when Chris Davis and Adam Jones weren't over the hill, you know what I mean, and Trumbo was actually still hitting. He might have been okay, but then he goes to the Dodgers and and now, now you're looking at San Diego, but San Diego got a young core around them that he can definitely put up some stats. In terms of who puts up better numbers, I'm leaning towards Harper. And it's going to be the counting stats, and this is where the lineup comes into play. The RBI opportunities more, the run opportunities with, we talked about who the Phillies lineup's going to be.
Right.
Potentially he got Hoskins, Real Muto, and McCutchen hitting behind him.
Exactly.
So you have all that. You're going to get the runs and the RBIs on that high-scoring offense. Machado, there's a lot of young guys. He's going to have to do it, a lot of it on his own. So he has a great hit tool. He'll put up his homers, but I don't see his runs and RBIs getting up into that 100-plus range like Harper will.
Yeah, I just see monster numbers from Harper. Just because of that ballpark. But looking over the projections, there's always a couple names, right? So there's one guy that stands out to me every year. I don't know why. Maybe you can help me. Edwin Encarnacion, a guy that's never drafted really high, but consistently is a masher. Nelson Cruz, a guy who it seems like you can basically get really late all the time, but essentially puts up major numbers. Why do guys like that not go as high as a guy like a Rizzo or a Goldschmidt or, obviously not Mookie Betts material, but I feel like their numbers aren't, it doesn't dictate where they really go. Am I wrong on that?
No, you're absolutely right. And I usually end up with one of these guys
because
on
they're sitting
team.
there. You're looking, you know what I mean?
And I'm always more of a veteran guy over the flashy rookie because the flashy rookies sometimes work and sometimes they don't. And sometimes they do 2-3 years later. This goes for football. I don't care what it is. Your rookie wide receiver that everybody's hyped up on, going into week one, a Calvin Ridley. In football last year, he didn't get drafted like ridiculously high.
Right.
He put up a few good weeks. But in general, that's the shiny new toy that ain't going to be that good for another year or two. Where the veteran, you know what they're getting. But the worst thing you could do is be on a veteran when on that first year of the decline.
And
that's what everybody's waiting for. I mean, you look at Cruz, he's sitting at 38. Last year he was sitting at 37. If everybody
Yeah,
everybody knew he would have put up 37 homers last year at age 37, they would have took him.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're always
Same
waiting
thing.
for that decline.
Right.
I know what you're
that's
saying.
Nelson Cruz. And same thing with Encarnacion. And, these guys, Encarnacion's still eligible at first, but I believe Cruz is now going to be DH only, which then bumps down those at bats potentially if they're not sticking them in the field. But yeah, I mean, Encarnacion, he's 36. So same thing. It's like, when is he going to drop off? Last year he only hit 32 bombs when it was 38 and 42 the 2 years before that. Is that the decline? I don't know. What do we think? I always end up higher on those guys than everybody else.
And the other thing is catchers. Catchers to me seem like, besides obviously JT Realmuto, who's the best catcher in baseball, but besides that, I mean, Buster Posey isn't the guy he once was, right? Salvatore Perez
out for the year.
Yeah. Already. I mean,
Yep.
He's a guy that's been injured how many times? So, I mean, it seems like catchers, like if you can't get Realmuto, you just wait.
Right? There's a handful. Yeah, there's different levels of weight. Yes, you're absolutely right. Realmuto and Sanchez.
Sanchez, obviously.
Those
right, he's a baller.
Right. Those would be the two where you have to – it's about margins in this game. You know what I mean?
Right.
Marginally, how much better. If you're getting a +8 home runs, let's say Realmuto or Sanchez, you got a 30 home run catcher versus the next guy that's going to be at 22. So you got an 8 home run difference. That's the same thing as getting a 30 home run guy versus a 38 home run guy.
That is true.
So the impact of that player is the same amount. It doesn't matter what the final number is. It's the increments. It's about the margins. So those guys stand out. And then I would say there's another 5 that are upper tier. You're looking at the Wilson Ramos.
That's another guy, right?
I would like to have him. Molina, he still hits. I'm sorry,
he does, but he's another guy you're just waiting for, right?
Yeah, I know.
You're waiting for the eventual decline.
Until he starts hitting under 270, I'm sticking with him because catchers drag down your batting average so bad.
What about he's another guy, another year, Contreras, Wilson?
Well, I like him, and I think that is the last one. He
had a down year last year.
Yes, he did. He had a down year. I do expect to bounce back, and that's the last catcher that I would actually take. Otherwise, treat him like your place kicker.
I was just going to say that. They're all the same, man.
Get him at the
it
end.
Doesn't matter.
Those are the only difference makers. Outside of those guys, hey, you could hit on a gem at any given point. You know what I mean? Danny Jansen, he's the prospect for the Blue Jays. He has potential to, really get some at bats, and who knows? I have him. Where do I have him ranked here? I just saw him. I got him at 15. What I mean?
Right in the middle of the pack.
Yeah. I mean, I have him there. He could outperform it. He could underperform it. You don't really know. But you look at all those guys, they're right in the same ballpark. You're talking 50 runs, 50 ribbies on the high side. Usually it's more 45.
Right,
and you got like 10 to 14 home runs.
Because let's face it, they don't play 162 games. Right, so you're always it's good to. So my thing is, if you're not going to go in there and get a Realmuto or a Sanchez or even a guy like a Contreras, well, you might as well just wait till the end of the draft to pick 2 dudes and go back and forth with them because essentially that's what's going to happen anyway. My guy was always Matt Waiters. I always had Matt Waiters as a backup for some reason. Like he was all even with his Baltimore days, he was a guy I could throw in there. But listen, man, we got to close this down. I didn't realize an hour goes by that fast. It's just great. I mean, listen, this was a great start to a great fantasy beginning. Okay, we're going to do this show bi-weekly. It's going to be available on the Full Press Radio Network. It's going to be available on our YouTube page. Okay, you can go to our YouTube page, the Heat Ratio, where all our videos are, all our podcasts are. They all reside there. If you can't get them on iTunes or Spotify or Google Play, you can just go to YouTube. And you can listen. Play it in the background. We do your work. It is what it is. But we don't have a name yet. We're going to come up with a name. We're going to throw it out to the fans out there. Support us, see if we can figure out a name for this. But March 20th, we will have our tier show, our ranking show. Get you ready for your draft. And we'll go by player, position, and we'll even see if we can get Coach Dave to do a little they'll do a little mock draft with us too.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it'll be fun. But again, this is your host, Tony Cotillo at TCotillo23, joined by always by my co-host, John Coger at PGH John36. Join us with the Heat Ratio on Twitter, the Heat Ratio on Instagram, the Heat Ratio Fantasy Sports Addiction on Facebook, and the Heat Ratio YouTube page. Appreciate all your support, and we will catch you on the 20th. See you later.